If you had been walking across this piazza early morning, any time from the late 1980s to about the early 2000s, then you would have seen, just over there, a group of people. A family of slightly piratical-looking, high-level exponents of one of the oldest jobs in the world. No, not that one. Oh, and I would have been one of them. Every morning, even now, street performers hang out here to sort out the schedule for the shows that will happen later in the day just here on the West Piazza. Now, I am, as I'm sure you're aware, not in any way famous, but I do okay. I started out on the street, and since then I've carved out what might generously be called a career in theatre, cabaret, and anywhere else there's an audience who want to see me. And I still love doing street shows every so often too. But there are some people who started out on the street just like me, but ended up a lot more well known. So, today we're going to look at 6 celebrities who started out as buskers and a few things that maybe they learned from doing it. Oh, and just to keep things simple and to weed out the fake brags of a million rock stars, when I say busker in this instance, I'm not talking about musicians. I'm talking about people who gathered a crowd and did a show. Okay, so let's get started with a household name who used to do some really silly stuff right here.
Eddie used to do shows right here in London's Covent Garden, and for a little while I shared a pitch with her. And if you've never seen a world-famous comedian escape from handcuffs while riding a unicycle, well, there you go. I caught up with Ed a few years ago, and we talked about those times.
When did you get down the garden?
Late 80s, 88.
I keep going just trying to work out everything.
I think we had about a year crossover.
Yeah, I left in 89.
Yeah. What are your memories of being a street performer? Are they fond?
Street performing got me Hollywood Bowl. By the end of street performing, I had learnt to develop this thing so that, you know, I could go to America and let's say, let's play bigger places, let's play arenas, push to do that. And that came from street performing, because street performing is, you know, a huge venue. That one, the West Piazza, is a huge venue, and the sky, it goes right up to some satellite going around space. It's got a big roof, i.e. no roof, and so learning to develop the confidence to stand there was the whole thing.
Yeah, I think people talk about charisma as a performer as if it's a kind of innate magical thing, but I think it's a learned skill. And I think street performing is one of the best ways of learning that skill, because you need to be able to get people to look at you and trust you by doing very little, just by having a manner about you.
Well, it's interesting. Charisma, I'd say confidence. I'd say street confidence is something learned, because you can have, I think you have a certain amount of confidence before you do the street, because after your first gig you will be rudely awakened to the fact that they don't care unless you're pretty damn good, because that you can't hold the edge. And the only other people have an edge is street vendors as well. They develop that, talk about working the edge, which is interesting. I saw a documentary on this. But yes, so charisma, yeah, that builds it. I feel charisma is like confidence plus, isn't it? It's confidence. Yeah. It's like some sort of special thing.
It's just taking it to the edge where it's nearly arrogance, but it's not quite.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
Swagger.
Yeah, that's being a pilot is something like that. No, because I'm scared of flying, so I learned to fly, and I found that to put the plane back down on the ground, you need a confidence bordering arrogance to say this piece of metal is going to get down, no problems. It has to, because it's beyond normal. And I kind of like, and the danger's way less, but on the street, it's only mental danger of performing. But you can, and if you've had this, we've all had this as street performers, people just leaving and, and it just being awful shows. I don't know if you've had it, I assume you've had it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I remember setting up stuff on the East Piazza, singing to myself on a cold, rubbishy day. But I was quite confident at this point, putting out the tea cozies, these animal tea cozies, the duck and the hippo and stuff, singing "There's no business like show business" to myself, which I liked the irony of. And someone came and kicked one of my tea cozies over.
Someone else who famously went from street performer to comedian was, of course, the late, great Robin Williams. Here he is on one of his regular pitches in front of the steps of New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1981. He'd performed there for a few years previously, but by the time this photo was taken, he was already the star of Mork and Mindy. But as you can see, he still occasionally returned to the streets. In fact, it was his work as a street performer that first got him considered for the role of Mork. But what did he learn from his time as a busker? Well, you only have to look at him work. His boundless energy and charisma, his Swiss Army knife of comedic tools, not just stand-up, but mime, clowning, dance, impressions, whatever it takes to keep the crowd and get that laugh. And then there's his legendary, fearless approach to improvisation. That comes from learning your stuff in a place with no rules. That's the street. Penn Jillette's partner, Teller, says the best thing Penn's ever done in his whole career is the 12-minute street juggling act that he did when he was young in Philadelphia. Penn was so successful a street performer that when he went to try and file taxes with his busking money, an accountant told him he'd likely be arrested on suspicion of being a drug dealer. And then his accountant said, "And by the way, I think you're a drug dealer." According to him, doing street shows was how he got his raspy voice, but it's also how he got his performing style. Part sideshow barker, part fast-talking conman. The busker's skill of verbally grabbing your audience by their lapels and yelling and selling. You know damn well you could put him back on the street in front of people who didn't know who he was, and he could still gather a crowd just like he used to. The young Pierce Brosnan arrived in London in the late 1960s, and he went to a workshop where he learned to fire breathe. He ended up doing circle shows for tourists in London, which in turn got him his first agent, which in turn got him into serious acting. So, without that street show, maybe we wouldn't have had the best James Bond ever. I said what I said. And if that sounds like the kind of story that might be invented by an actor to sound cool in interviews, well, he backed it up when he guest starred on The Muppet Show. While he was working multiple other jobs to put food on the table and before he made it to the clubs, Bernie Mac would do his stand-up routine on the streets and subway stations of the south side of Chicago. What did he learn? Well, I'm going to hazard a guess that when he ended up on stage at HBO's Def Comedy Jam in front of an unruly audience and told them,
"I ain't scared of you motherfuckers."
Well, that sounds like a street performer's bravery to me. Feels like the Windy City gave him a thick skin. And you couldn't ask for a more fitting full circle. After his sad early death in 2008, he ended up getting one of those Chicago streets named after him. Now, you might not know the name Luke Creswell, but you know his work. In the early 80s, he co-founded a street band called Pookie Snackenburger. They were a riot of noise and movement, perfectly suited to getting people's attention on the London street pitches where they worked. Their thing was playing percussion on found objects, trash cans, mops, stuff like that. Sound familiar? Pookie Snackenburger became the Yes No people, and then finally they morphed into Stomp, and Stomp took over the world. What did he learn from street performing? Well, I'd say he took his idea, something existing but with his unique twist, and then fully committed to it. He played it loud, both figuratively and literally. Street performers learn to be bold and confident about the things that make their act special. They learn the power of yelling at the world and telling it why it should watch.
Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed that. Just before you go, since the late 1980s I've made my living as a live performer, but obviously in recent times that has changed. COVID-19 meant that virtually all of my tours, shows and other live projects for 2 years and counting have been cancelled. My earnings last year were 2% of what they were in the last year before the pandemic, so as you can imagine, my career and my life have been made more difficult. Now, I've worked hard to keep creative. I write, I started a podcast, and I regularly make things for this YouTube channel, but none of these things really keep the lights on. So, all I ask is that if you enjoy any of the things that I make, or if you might have bought a ticket to one of my shows, then maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. And if you're unable to afford that, and trust me, I understand, then subscribing to my YouTube channel, my podcast, and following me on Twitter and Instagram, and sharing the things that I make on your social media platforms of choice costs nothing, helps me reach more people, and is greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.